morning, this is Dr. Justina Agnieszka Chevalier. I have written a book that is entitled and contains it's entitled the Sutra of Permanence of Sex Children, and it is meant for sexual education because the topic is withdrew from all of major sciences and is present in such way that it degrades humans, degrades human nature, and reduces the whole idea of pursuit of children to a scientific process in medicine that leads to abuse, in fact, of in vitro fertilization, contraceptives, and many other things uh, that are and or enter under the psychotropic drugs, and in fact in artificial intent to recreate conditions of successful relationship for adults. These maneuvers are made to enable work as well as enable persons to postpone during years of education and to work children and relationships for a very long time. That is dissociated in knowledge and is not something that is spoken about. Prudency or modesty does not justify these um, very aggressive, long term, costing lots of side effects, ways, medical ways to substitute sexual activity for a sexual pursuit of child as a plan. And that is why I've done it. I've done also because I took as a graduate of program leadership in education and neurodevelopmental disorders. I took also time to review certain things, such as what therapy does for persons, and also what is done in so-called prenatal consulting. These things are as if sexual activity was meant for hedonistic purposes, only to deliver pleasure, and that pleasure is low degree pleasure that is considered an activity similar to, for instance, unilateral pursuit of fun at the dancing club, or a pursuit of, for instance, food. The difference between pursuit of food and sexual activity is that sex is actually not a unilateral need. In absence of an ideal partner that is loved, there is no rise in sexual desire because we don't have preset, exempt from stimuli, outside stimuli, sexual drive that occurs spontaneously. Because changes, physiological and mental changes, to pursue having a child in sexual act have to happen to two persons in couple, cause delight, and occur in function of these changes occurring in the other person. And when that happens in a cohort of persons, there is no place for confusion, because a mistake to the person is denominated sexual harassment and pursuit of such activity that is unwanted, as opposed to the activity with the person whose physiological changes are source of own arousal, is rape. And so the only difference between rape and sexual harassment is mistake to the person that is in own sexual changes and preparation for sexual act, reason to have such being a specific individual in self, in each and every couple. There is some degree of science that has been for years distorted to such magnitude that in fact all of these processes are separated between mind and the body, as well as from interactions with others, as if a human was a being living in a vacuum. I wrote that book in California, and I also elaborated what I call a hexa method. Hexa is six, meaning six components that need to take place to have a relationship for life that leads to lasting attachment, that enables a couple to stay together to facilitate life in function of being happiest as opposed to with other persons and doing other activities than having intimacy, including adult sexual intimacy. And that is the topic that includes also many of social phenomena such as racism, discrimination, and unfair competition, because these topics result from trying to present sexual activity or ideal partner as if it was an employer. It is present in workplaces and in dating websites that persons apply to profiles that are similar to profiles at work with own profile that consist of work achievements. From the standpoint of medicine, changes occurring in preparation for sexual acts, physiological changes such as relaxation of muscles, such as a discharge of adrenaline to pursue the partner as opposed to do other activities, such as concentration of that person and inability to pursue any other activity, both sexual activity with that person, are not compatible with work or with other hobbies and activities, nor they are at times compatible with sufficiently fulfilled other physiological needs. Meaning it is one or the other. We cannot have sex and work. And that is why achievements at work, all of those degrees and titles, when it comes to sexual activity being in love, puts them on a second plan. And the more the person is educated, the more that person is actually sought after to see sexual activity, and partners of that person are considered danger to non-selective survival of others, all altruism. And therefore many times sexual activity and love is impeded by workplaces, impeded by families cared for by persons, children from past marriages, as well as other causes such as, for instance, altruistic pursuits, to the extent that the person who is preferred most is not possible to consider or pursue the end changes that occur normally, spontaneously, persons without education, changes like consistent with the state of being in love or state consistent in reciprocity with sexual acts. So being desirous as in function of being observed by the person who derives from it own arousal, which occurs always in couple, to an extent of possessive love, meaning all others pursuing are considered unkind and lead to self-defense or shyness, so hiding and wearing more hiding clothes, unless that person feels safe in exchange of love declarations and reciprocity, confirmation that the interest exists, and enables that other person who is source of changes, so feeling more comfortable walking, having more provocative clothes, enables that person having trust that the person is source to sing, dance, or wear provocative clothes. That is why many of so-called mental illnesses are direct result of intent to impede sexual activity that collides with work, altruism, and with care for others, and is illegal when realized to force as pathology and administer drugs for that mimic state of being in love or mimic pregnancy to alter hormonal states of persons, especially women, to have an impression of being pregnant already and not pursue marriages and sexual activity that is wanted. It is very important to know some from standpoint of human rights and medicine and know differentiate relationship that is impossible. Impossible relationship is a relationship in which there is no reciprocity, because even though changes in preparation for sexual act occur, that relationship is impeded by the other person's external conditions that are not at fault of that person. Example of that are imprisonment, long-term confinement to military spaces, or a service for community that is a monastic celibacy, by external need for work to assure of safety and survival of self and others in that area, and are the only reason, similar to wars, that the medication to mimic state of corresponded love and mimic state of pregnancy, such as long-lasting contraceptives, are administered. Otherwise, they are not necessary for a single person who lacks exchange in feedback of changes consistent with love or sexual arousal at all times. Not having such will and such person that generates those is unnecessary, and are also unnecessary when it happens and causes the line, because it happens in function of two persons, and what it takes is awareness that the other person has to, for the sexual act to happen and approach, pursue that relationship, feel the same way, and they also occur in duos as opposed to in others. Only children derive pleasure from arousal that they think and know is not because of them. Observing parents, for instance, in sexual act, in the learning voyeurism. Otherwise, humans, we do not experience that, because possessive love is in itself defined as love where source of sexual arousal and love is specific one individual as opposed to all others, and is in function of same degree of reciprocity, and marks couple as opposed to others.